Okay, so welcome to lecture number 128 on Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed. We are about to study tonight together part 3, chapter 45. When I say page numbers, I'm referring to the Shlomo Penis edition, and that's the translation that we've been using until now, so that's what I'll continue to use. Um, we are currently in the section of chapters where Rambam discusses the reasons for the commandments, the reasons for the mitzvot of the Torah. So, way back in the beginning of this discussion, he divided all of the commandments into 14 classes, which roughly corresponds to the books of the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam's halachic magnum opus, where he discusses the laws of each of these categories. And the commandments that we're about to learn today, I'm going to start to read on page 575, chapter 45. The commandments comprised in the 10th class are those that we have enumerated in the laws concerning the chosen temple, right? The Hilchot Beit HaBechira in the Mishnah Torah, the laws concerning the utensils of the sanctuary and those who work in it, and the laws concerning entry into the sanctuary. All of those laws, excuse me, that pertain to the temple, the utensils in the temple, the people that served in the temple, who can go in, who can't go in, when and how, and so on. All of those laws those comprise the 10th class. We have already made known in a general way the utility of this class of commandments, where the Rambam just in general said that all of these laws were designed to create a sense of sanctity, so that people should understand that this isn't just any other place, that when you treat this building differently, one recognizes that this building has a special purpose, special meaning, and one should hopefully walk into it and experience a closeness to God. Now, but that was the general way that he's mentioned before. But now he's going to go into more details of the different laws and some of the reasons why some of these laws are the way they are. So it is known, and one of the things that you'll find, and this is a pattern that I'm sure we're now familiar with as we've been going through the Rambam, that the Rambam consistently looks at the milieu and the context within which these laws were given to the Jewish people at the time where they lived, and the cultures within which they lived, and what they were used to. And they were used to a culture of avodah zarah, which is of idol worship, that had certain practices and ideas. So that which God is commanding the people is there's really, you'll find in all of these answers, there's really two, not exactly conflicting, but two different approaches. Number one, God takes those practices which the people are used to, right? In terms of for their service, of their worship of things that holy things, or things that they think are holy, like idols or whatever, right? And gives it and renews it with a new purpose, things that they're used to, things that people are comfortable with. That's one approach. And the other approach is God takes it and twists it in such a way that you're not allowed to do it the way they used to do it. So in other words, those practices that are specifically associated with idol worship, I don't want you to do it that way. I want you to either not do it at all or do it this way. So you'll see those two things, and you'll see it consistently in the way he describes a lot of these laws. And the truth is it's not that different. It reminds me of when I was the first time I went to a baseball game with my father. So I was, let's say, I don't know, I must have been 7 years old, 8 years old, maybe. It was a Baltimore Orioles game in the old Memorial Stadium, which is knocked down many years ago. And they sang the national anthem. So everybody takes off their baseball caps and stands there, with their baseball cap on the heart, and listens to the national anthem out of respect. And we put our hands on our heart, but we kept our kippahs on our head. And I don't know if that's the right or the wrong way. Maybe take your kippah off and like everyone. But the idea that taking your hats off is a gesture of respect, right? That's the way it is in this culture, right? So we do it the opposite, right? We go into a shul and we put our hat on. What the reasons and the origins of these things, that's not the place for tonight, right? But the point being, putting on a hat, taking off a hat is a gesture of respect or disrespect, depending on the context, right? It's something that we're used to. There's no specific, so if someone, let's say, were to come into a synagogue thinking, and take off his hat out of a gesture of respect, not knowing that he's supposed to put a kippah on, whatever, that he'd be doing that as a gesture. There's no inherent specialness to the hat, right? There's nothing that's particular about a hat. If the gesture was to do something else, right, then it would be something else. But this is what people do in that culture. So it's a very similar thing, and you'll see these things coming up over and over again. The kinds of actions that people do to show respect or show lack of respect are the kinds of things that we're going to find in these laws. So it is known that idolaters, I'm reading in the second paragraph, sought to build their temples and to set up their idols in the highest places they could find there. That was the way they used to do it. They would look for a mountaintop, and that was where they would build their temples, upon the high mountains. Therefore, Avram Avinu, Abraham, our forefather, singled out Mount Moriah. He designated Mount Moriah because of its being the. Now, when the Rambam says Avram Avinu did it, remember Avram was the first time we hear of it was when he was sent there by God to sacrifice his son Isaac. So and the Rambam considers a prophet, right? Avram did that through prophecy. So he'll switch off between saying God did it and the prophet did it, right? Because they're kind of one and the same. The prophet did it through God's prophecy, or God did it through the prophet. So it's the same thing by saying Avram Avinu did it, because it was the story of Avram Avinu which designated Har Moriah, the mountain upon which the Beit Hamikdash, the temple, would be, because of its being the highest mountain there in that area. That's the tall, prominent mountain. Proclaimed upon it the unity of God, and determined and defined the direction towards which one would turn in prayer. And Avram Avinu also designated the direction to which we should pray, right? Fixing it exactly in the west, that we should pray facing the west. That might confuse some of you, so let me explain, right? If you're standing in the temple is oriented so that pretty much almost anywhere on the Temple Mount, the Holy of Holies, within which is contained the ark, toward which one is supposed to pray, is on the west. Sorry, my cat almost knocked my light over. I apologize for that. So when you're in the Beit HaMikdash, when you're in the temple, you're facing west when you're praying, right? Nowadays we pray towards the Holy of Holies, but we most of us, at least in the United States and most of Europe, live to the west of it, so we face east, right? But if you're in the temple, you're facing west. That should be pretty make reasonable sense. For the Holy of Holies is in the west. This is the meaning of the dictum of Chazal, of the sages. The indwelling is in the west. That's what it means when it says the Shekhinah, God's rests in the west, because that's where we face. They made, I remember, be blessed, have made clear in the Gemara and Yuma that Avram Avinu fixed the direction towards which one should turn in prayer. I mean, the temple of Holy of Holies. So why west? Why not north? Why not south? Why not east? Why not northeast? Why not 13 degrees to the southwest, right? What's special about west? The reason is as follows, in my opinion, Rambam says. Inasmuch as that at the time, the opinion generally accepted in the world was to the effect that the sun should be worshipped and that it is the deity. There is no doubt that all men turned when praying toward the east. The practice of most people then, that believed in different deities, the sun was either the main one or one of the main ones, and people would pray towards the direction from which the sun comes, which is the east, right? So therefore, Avram Avinu turned when praying on Mount Moriah, when he was standing there and he was praying, in the sanctuary, in the location where the sanctuary is, he prayed towards the west so as to turn his back upon the sun. He wanted to show that I'm praying in a different direction. I don't pray to the sun. My back is facing the sun. I pray to God. The sun is behind me because the sun is not a God, Do you not see what the children of Israel did when they apostatized, became infidels, and returned to those ancient pernicious views? We know from the famous verse in Ezekiel where he criticizes the people for standing in the temple and facing towards the sun to pray, right, with their backs towards the temple. So understand this strange thing. That's what people did when they went in the wrong direction. So you see clearly that the reason for facing away from the sun is in order to demonstrate that you're not praying towards the sun, but so to show that the idea of facing in the direction of the deity is retained, but with a twist, right? Instead of facing this way, we face that way in order to show that we're not worshiping idols. In my opinion, there is also no doubt that the place singled out by Abraham in virtue of prophetic inspiration was known to Moshe and many others, right? That place was not newly established, even though one could read the books of Melachim, of Kings, when David and Solomon built the temple and chose the place for the temple and built it. One might think that they figured it out then, but no, it was taught, it was known from the time of Abraham what the place is. For Abraham had recommended to them that the place should be a house of worship, just as the translator sets forth when he says, if you look at Targum Onkelos on that verse, right, the Onkelos Aramaic translation, he writes, he kind of translates the verse there, that Avram worshipped and prayed and said before God, here will worship the generations, and so on. It's not explicitly in the verse. The fact that this place is not stated explicitly when mentioned. So if it's true, right, that Avram Avinu designated the place and passed on the knowledge of its special location to future generations, so then why is it not mentioned in the Torah? Only hinted at. It says which the place which God will choose. God says, I will choose a place. But if it's already known by Abraham, then why? And it's being taught from generation to generation, and the tradition among the people was they knew where it was. So why isn't it explicitly written? Is due, in my opinion, to three wise considerations, and these wise considerations have profoundly fascinating uh, uh, um, um, ramifications to this day, and you'll understand in a second what I mean. The first is which spot on earth probably had more wars fought over it than any other spot on earth? Probably the Temple Mount, right? I don't think that would be an exaggeration. Maybe if someone else has another example, tell me. But God didn't say in the Torah which the place was, lest nations should hold fast to that place and fight for it with great violence, knowing as they do that the place is the final purpose of the Torah on earth. Because everyone knows that that's where the Torah is the full fulfillment of the promises of the Torah will take place there. So everyone's going to fight over it. Unfortunately, it's happening to this day. Hasn't stopped. So I guess maybe God held off some of that violence a little bit for a few generations after Abraham until we came, and then since then it's been a point of contention. The second is lest those who then owned the place, in other words, before the Jews came out of Egypt and arrived there, ravage and devastate it to the limit of their power. They might just wreck it and ruin it and destroy it, which, as we very well know, those who conquered it from us, especially the Romans, what did they do to it? They ravaged it and devastated it, right, in order to show their disdain for our God and our religion. So Rambam is drawing from very well-known history when he's making these statements. And the third, and it is the strongest, and the other thing is, lest every tribe should demand that the place be within its allotted portion. The Jews shouldn't fight over who gets the temple, right? Reuven's going to say, I want it in my place. And Shimon's going to say, I want it in my place. And Laban's say, I want it in my, everyone's going to argue over this land. They're all going to say, I want this land. I want this land. So God didn't say it in the Torah so that the Jews shouldn't fight over Yerushalayim, and it should go to the tribe which God decides it should go to, right? And should seek to conquer it. Which would lead to conflict and sedition, such as happened with regard to the priesthood, which we see later on did happen. People arguing over who should be the Kohen, who should be the Kohen. Now, most people assume that what Rambam is referring to, such as happened, referring to the story of Korach in the Torah, where Korach argued and demanded that he should be the priest. Everybody should be priests. So that's the most people understand. Others, for various reasons, assume that Rambam is referring to much later in history, the time of the Hasmoneans, when the Hasmoneans took over the kingdom and there was tons of fights over who should be the priests. They assume that he's talking about that historical occurrence. So regardless, the point is the same. Whatever he's referring to, people, just like people fought over who should be the priests, people are going to fight over who should be the owners of the land upon which the temple is built. Therefore, the command was given that the chosen temple should only be built after the elevation of a king. That's why the Torah said, first you need a king, then you have a temple. Because only he would be the only one who would be qualified to give commands and quarrels would cease, as we have explained in the book of Judges. The book of Judges is referring to Rambam's Sefer, Rambam's book in Mishnah Torah, the Sefer of Shoftim, which is one of the books of the Mishnah Torah. So once you have a king, he's in charge. He says, this is where it is, finished. Don't bother me, right? Solomon, at least when he built it, was in power and had a powerful hold over the people and was able to just make the decision, and that was it. Fine. So those three things, ironically, despite God doing his best, human beings, unfortunately, wrecked all three. We fight over it. The nations fight over it. Everybody devastates it when they conquer it. And so it is history. It is known, so let's move on, these people built temples for the stars, and that in that temple, an idol, who's on the second paragraph now on page 576, whose worship was agreed upon, was set up. I mean, an idol assigned to a certain star or to a portion of a sphere. Remember, the spheres in Rambam's cosmology are those spheres within which the stars are embedded that rotate around the earth. Consequently, we are commanded to build a temple for him, may be exalted, and place in it an ark, within which the two tablets containing the words of Anochi and Loia, in other words, the 10 commandments. So the Rambam here is specifically stating that the entire building of a temple, right, was because that's how people did it then, right? The reason why we built the temple and the way it was done, why do we have an ark? Why do we have these things? And he's going to go through the other implements, the other holy items in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, soon. But for now, just why did we set up a temple with an ark and all this? Because that's what everybody did then. That's how people worshiped. Everyone was used to going to a temple to pray to that idol. So the Jews, God tells the Jews, you're going to build a temple too. It's going to be different than everyone else in many ways, but in some ways it's very similar. It's the kind of structure of spirituality that people were used to. Again, going back to the same principles I told you to look out for, and you're going to see them repeatedly throughout this and other chapters. And we've, of course, seen it before. It is known that the fundamental principle of belief in prophecy precedes the belief in the Torah. I'm translating the word law to Torah because that's just it's the one that Rambam actually uses in his writing, and it's Pinas who changes it to law because Torah means law, right? But I like saying Torah better. It just sounds better than belief in the law. Anyway, so for we the Torah we know why do we believe in the Torah? Because it's been taught to us by prophets, obviously by the main prophet Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So and remember, you have to keep in mind in this paragraph Rambam's model of prophecy, right? The prophecy is the overflow that goes from beyond the level of the spheres, right? Through the highest sphere to the lower sphere to the lower sphere, and the prophet taps into those overflows, right, and is able to interpret and create images and words that encapsulate that vision, right, that idea, and then teach it to us, right? So and those levels, those spheres through which those overflows from up above and that which they come down, those are what the Rambam calls angels, right? So when the Rambam is about to state believing in an angel, right, remember that what he's talking about. He's not talking about, a woman with white wings flying around the house. He's talking about something else, right? He's talking about Rambam's angels. Just keep that in mind when we're about to do it. The prophet receives prophetic revelation only through the intermediary of the angel. Thus, and the angel of the Lord called, and so on, and the angel of the Lord said unto her, so on. This occurs innumerable times. Even in the case of Moshe, his prophetic mission is inaugurated through an angel. He was eventually Moshe reached an even higher level where he, so to speak, spoke to God panim, face to face, right? But and the ideas of prophecy, Rambam discussed at length, and we spent many, many weeks on that. So I'm not going to go into any detail, but remember what he means when he says angel is not the same thing that the Disney movies mean when they have angels depicted. So please make sure you understand that when you keep that in your mind, right? Consequently, it has been made clear that belief, right, in the existence of angels precedes the belief in prophecy, and the belief in prophecy precedes the belief in the Torah, right? So now, so these are all true. And okay, why am I saying all this? Rambam says, and I'm at the bottom paragraph of page 576. As the Sabians are the example, is just a catchphrase, which means all the groups of idol worshippers in the Middle East prior to the advent of monotheism. All of them are called Sabians, right? As the Sabians, are you able to hear me? Because my air conditioning just went on and it's a little loud. Just somebody nod or something. Can
Yeah.
you hear me? You can't? Okay. All right. So as the Sabians were ignorant of the existence of the deity, may he be exalted and glorified, they didn't know there was a God, right? Or they ignored the fact that there was a God or whatever, and thought that the sphere with its stars is the being that is eternal. They thought that it's the sphere, which you and I would call the galaxies or the outer space or whatever we would call it, right? The universe, right? To which non-being can never come, right? The stars are always, they're eternal, they're always there according to their philosophy, right? And that forces flow over from the sphere towards idols and certain trees. I mean, the Asherot, they this is how they thought that these overflows would come from the upper spheres and the stars, and then they would flow into their idols, these idols that they were worshiping, and into the trees that they were worshiping. So they thought that the idols and trees give prophetic revelation to the prophets. They thought that their prophets that were speaking these words of God were getting revelation through these idols and trees, which were receiving revelations from levels above them. And they speak to them in the course of such a revelation and make known to them what is useful and what is harmful, according to their doctrines that we have explained to you with reference to the prophets of Baal and prophets of Asherah. We discussed this in the past. Thereupon, when the truth became clear to the men of knowledge, and it became known by demonstration that there is a being that is neither a body nor a force in a body, who is the true deity, and that he is one, and that there are also other beings that are separate from matter and are not bodies, being toward whom his being may be exalted overflows, namely the angels, as we have explained, and that all these beings are beyond the sphere and its stars, it became known. Okay, so you understand, once people understood the true understanding of the Torah, which Rambam just summarized in a couple of sentences, that there is one deity that is beyond our comprehension, and that he's not a body. There's no way to describe him in any way that we can describe anything, um, and um, and that there's these spheres and these these angel and the spheres with the spheres are these angels through which overflow comes down to earth. Remember, the scientific explanation that Rambam gave us for how the world works and how the world moves. This is very an Aristotelian physics or metaphysics. So just I can't do in detail now, but we spent weeks and weeks on understanding this. But once we understood how this works, so then remember, all of this is what Rambam said by demonstration. When he says demonstration, he means like you and I would say it was proven by experiment. This is all scientifically correct and Aristotelian, um, uh, consistent with Aristotle. So it became known with certainty that true prophetic revelation is given to the prophets by angels, not by idols and Asherah. And these idols are nothing. These are just statues. They're meaningless, and they're just trees. Thus it has become clear through what we have stated before that the belief in the existence of angels is consequent upon the belief in the existence of the deity, and that thereby prophecy and the Torah are established and valid. In order to fortify belief in this fundamental principle, so why is Rambam going through all of this? What's the point, right? Because he's talking about the items in the Beit HaMikdash. And there's one item in the Beit HaMikdash, which is when we think, the main thing, what do we think about? The first thing you think about is the Aron Kodesh, the Ark of the Covenant. And what do we remember when we think about the Ark of the Covenant? There's two angels on top, right? What's the point? Like, why? Like, where does that come from, right? And that's what he's building up to. So he says, because of the importance of this idea and the fact that angels are the vehicle through which prophecy comes to earth, right? Therefore, he may be exalted, as commanded that the image of two angels be made over the ark, so that the belief of the multitude in the existence of the angels can be consolidated. So that people, the multitude, which Rambam usually uses that term when he's referring to the simple folk, right? So that they should realize that it's through angels that we know that the Torah is true. So this correct opinion, coming in the second place after the belief in the existence of the deity, this idea, which is important, which is second to the idea that there is God, which is more important, constituting the originative principle of belief in prophecy and the Torah and refuting idolatry, as we have explained. A lot of this is really very hard to understand if you haven't been with us the entire time, right? And I don't mean, it's just that if you don't understand, we did go through this in detail, and the Rambam explained this as his understanding of physics, right? That there's a prime mover. This was Aristotelian physics. The prime mover, the one who gives energy to everything, the outermost sphere, and that is the deity. That's God. And from God's energy, so to speak, I'm using that word because I don't have a better one, but overflows to the first sphere, which overflows to the next sphere, and that moves that one, and the next sphere and moves that one. And these spheres are what we look at when we look in the heavens and we see stars in the sky and we see them rotating around, right? Remember, they had a geocentric universe. They thought the earth was the center of it all. So everything is rotating around earth. And that this wisdom, this knowledge, or this energy, whatever you want to call it, this overflow would go from layer to layer to layer, and those were angels, right? That's what it means when we say angels, right? That's what the Rambam understood it meant when it said angels. It's like you and I saying today, what's an angel? An angel is the energy of an atom, right? Right? The energy of an electron, right? Because that's using the word angel to describe what you and I understand from modern physics, right? So Rambam was just using the term angel to describe what he understood from his modern physics, which was what I just described to you from Aristotle, right? So but this belief is crucially important, right? So therefore, God represented it in a way that people see, the multitude sees angels and put them on the Ark of the Covenant. So fine. If there had been one image, I mean the image of one cherub, but let's say there was only one angel there, right? It should have conveyed the same message, right? This might have been misleading, for it might have been thought that this was the image of the deity who was to be worshipped. People might think, oh, we're worshiping that. That's the idol, right? So therefore, such things being done by the idolaters, or that there was only one individual angel, or there's just one, a belief that would have led to certain dualism. That would have led to something similar to Zoroastrianism, which is a more dualistic religion, right? Which had two powers. So, however, the two cherubim were made, two cherubim, right? Cherubs, and the explicit statement announced the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. The validity of the opinion affirming the existence of angels was established, and the fact that there are many angels. Thus, measures were taken against the error that they are the deity being one and having created this multiplicity. So that's the Rambam's explanation for the purpose of having the cherubs, the cherubim. Now, this explanation is heavily dependent on Aristotelian physics, right? Nowadays, our understanding of physics is, is completely different in ways that Rambam couldn't even have imagined, right? So I don't think it would be wrong for one of us to think of a different reason. Like, I think the Rambam gave this explanation because this is how he saw the world, right? So this is how he viewed the significance of the Kruvim. I think that he would, if he was alive today, he would give a different explanation. I don't know what. I can't say what. I have no idea, but it would have been different. So you and I kind of have an open book here to think on our own what might be the symbolism or the reason for the Keruvim. Maybe in his time, the Keruvim meant something. Maybe in our time, we could see other meanings in the Keruvim, and based, on the way we see science and the way we see how the world works. Okay, so he's going to go on to the menorah now. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything about this explanation, which is a little bit out there, but it is what it is. So, any comments, questions? All right. If not, I'm going to go on. Thereupon, this is the bottom of page 577. A candlestick, a menorah, was placed in front of it in order to glorify and honor the temple. For the temple, which was always illumined by lamps and separated by means of a veil, right? Because there's a curtain between the Holy of Holies and the part where the menorah was, made a great impression upon the soul. You know to what extent the Torah fortifies the belief in the greatness of the sanctuary and the awe felt for it, so that on seeing it, man should be affected by a sentiment of submission and servitude. It says that you shall feel my sanctuary. You should fear my sanctuary. An injunction that he has coupled with the precept to keep the Sabbath in order to strengthen the fear of the sanctuary. So, in other words, the light is important. Having that glow, that light leads an atmosphere of awe and mystery and wonder. So it helps enhance the atmosphere to inspire one to awe of the greatness of the temple and, of course, of God. The need for the altar for incense and the altar for burnt offering and for their utensils is manifest. It's obvious why we need to have an altar for the incense. He's going to explain in a minute what the significance of the incense itself is. But because he's going to tell us later why the incense is important, it's obvious that you need to have a place to put it. So to have an altar for incense makes sense. And the same thing, the altar on the outside, which is there for the burnt offerings, the mizbeach for the sacrifices. We're going to explain later, not in this chapter, but later, what the significance of the sacrifices themselves is. But once you need to bring sacrifices, you have to have an altar to bring it on. As for the table, people have asked me many times, does the Rambam leave anything unexplained? So yes, he does, and he's about to right now. As for the table and the bread that was always to be upon it, I do not know the reason for this, and I have not found up to now something to which I might ascribe to this practice. I have no idea what the point of the showbread is. Finished. Next subject. As for the prohibition, right? So, in other words, he's not beyond saying, I don't know. Now, it's interesting because there are many places, specifically in Tanakh and Yirmiyahu, which describes significance to the showbread, the lachem apanim, and why it's important. So it's a little weird why Rambam chose not to draw upon those sources to explain the reason for it. But that's a subject for a different thing. But I find interesting here is that he wasn't beyond saying, even though he's in the section where he says everything has a reason, there is a reason. I just don't know what it is. But what he's really doing is he's leaving it up to us. You could think about it. You could study. You could learn. You can give a nice speech, and maybe you can come up with the reason, right? As for the prohibition against hewing the stones of the altar, what about the prohibition that you're not allowed to cut the stones for the mizbeach? They can't be made out of cut stones. You know the reason the sages have given for this in their dictum. The sages have given a famous one. It's not fitting for that which shortens human life, which is metal, a knife which kills people, to be lifted up against that which prolongs it, to be used. So we shouldn't use, therefore, a knife on the mizbeach, on the altar. This is excellent in the matter of the midrashim, as we have explained. This is a beautiful poetic idea But it's, remember, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago when the Rambam said you have to understand that Medrash is not the real understanding of the verse. It's just a very nice, beautiful idea that we can learn lessons from, but it's not the reason. So it's beautiful. It's a great idea. Everybody knows that it's well known. However, I have to give a better reason, the Rambam says, which I think is the real reason, right? So the reason for this is manifest. For the idolaters used to build altars with hewn stones, they used to build their altars with stones that were cut. Accordingly, assimilation to them, right, was prohibited, right? We didn't want to do it the same way as they did it. In order to avoid this assimilation to them, it was commanded that the altar be made of earth. That instead of stones, we should just make it out of earth. It says an altar of earth shall you make, right? If, however, it's indispensable to make it with stones, earth is hard to keep going because it's going to keep falling apart. It's going to wash away. It's not very sturdy, a mound of earth, right? So instead, if you're going to use stones, they must have their natural form and not be hewn. They shouldn't be cut, because again, we don't want it to be like their altars. Similarly, it is forbidden to set up a figured stone and to plant a tree beside the altar. You're not allowed to make the stone which has any kind of shape to it, right? And it also you cannot plant a tree there, because again, that was an idolatrous practice. In all this, there is one and the same purpose, namely that we should not worship God in the form of the particular cults practiced by them with regard to the object of the worship. And this is the meaning of the prohibition in general. It's just interesting, this dichotomy here, because on the one hand, he says that the temple was set up in such a way just like their temples were. So just like they had a temple and an idol in it, so we have a temple and an Aron Kodesh in it, right? That's what he said, right? At the same time, he says, but ours has to be different, right? We're not allowed to do it the same way that they did it. So we're going to make a temple, but we're going to have an ark. We're going to have two cherubs, not one. So we're not worshiping one God, right? One idol. We're not thinking, we're going to have a temple. We're going to have an altar. We're going to do our altar different than their altar, because their altar is hewn stones. Ours is going to be different. So it's the same but different, right? So in other words, it's so that people should worship in the way that they're familiar with, the way that they can spiritually tap into. At the same time, make a statement that we're leaving and changing from our old idolatrous ways and taking upon ourselves a new type of religion, a new type of spirituality. It's as it says, the prohibition in general, as it says, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. The meaning is, one must not act in this way with regard to God for the reason which it states, for every abomination to the Lord which he hates. Why is it that it's so bad to go to the idolatrous ways? Because they have done all kinds of abominations to their gods and so on, and therefore I want you to stay away from idolatrous practices. Okay. You know how widespread was the worship of Peor. There was one we find in the Torah, the Baal Peor is one of the idols that was worshipped in those days, and it consisted in the uncovering of nakedness. They would get undressed, they would relieve themselves in front of this idol. Therefore, it commands the priests. That's why they have to make breeches, pants, to cover the flesh of their nakedness during the divine service, so that they're completely covered and their private parts are not showing. Nevertheless, they were commanded not to go up to the altar by steps, that thy nakedness be not uncovered thereon. They couldn't walk up steps, because when you walk up steps, if you're not wearing the kind of pants that we wear today, it can reveal your private. So therefore, they had a ramp instead. As for the duty constantly to keep watch over the sanctuary and to go around it, this was commanded in order to glorify and honor it. It makes sense. It was to honor it, right? So that the ignorant, the unclean, and those who were in a disheveled state should not rush up to it, as shall be explained. For one of the things that necessarily resulted in exaltation and glorification of the sanctuary of the Mikdash, bringing about in us fear of it, was the prohibition against drunken, unclean, and disheveled individuals. I mean, those with unkempt hair and torn garments entering it. You should be dressed nice. You should go to the mikvah, wash first. You should make sure your hair is combed nice and you're and get a nice haircut and you look like a human being and you don't come drunk, so on and so forth. Everyone engaged in the divine service shall sanctify his hands and his feet, wash your hands and feet, etc. Also, In order to exalt the temple, the rank of its servants was exalted. The people who worked there, that was considered a special job, that was an honorable position to have, would be to be someone who works in the Beit HaMikdash, right? So the priests and the Levites were singled out, and the priests were the most splendid, finest, and most beautiful garments, holy garments for splendor and for beauty. They had special clothes to wear. You have a special uniform, and it was commanded that someone who has a blemish should not be employed in the divine service. A person should be a good-looking, healthy-looking person, not a person with a malformation of some sort. Um, and not only one who is afflicted with an infirmity, but also those afflicted with deformities are disqualified from being priests, as explained. For to the multitude, not that there's anything wrong with that person, but the people, the general public, an individual is not rendered great by his true form. People don't look at what's inside, but by perfection of his limbs and the beauty of his clothes. People look at what's outside. So the general public, when they come, they see a big, tall guy, 6'6", really good looking, all well done, with his hair and his beard looking really nice and trim, and wearing a nice big uniform. They say, "Ooh, that looks special," right? If you see someone that doesn't look like that, he's not. Nobody makes movies with ugly people. They make movies with good-looking people, because nobody wants to go to a movie and watch ugly. That's just the way it is, whether it's good or not. Even though it's not right, the Rambam is saying, that's not the true person, but that's what people look at, and therefore they should look good, and so on. So that's how the multitude look at people. And what is aimed at is that the temple and its servants should be regarded as great by all. Everybody should come and see the temple servants and say, "Oh, they're great." As for the son of Levi, what about the Levite? He did not sacrifice and was not imagined as imploring forgiveness for sin. He's not the one that led prayers or anything. As it is stated with regard to the priest would lead the person who brings a korban, a sacrifice, lead them in the prayer of vidoy, of confession, or before you bring a sin offering, etc. But that was not the Levi's role. The purpose of the Levi was singing only. For the purpose of singing, too, is to bring about an affection of the soul by means of the words in question. In other words, they would sing words that would affect your soul, that would stir you to repentance, to awe of God, to love of God, etc. So the soul can only be affected by means of pleasing melodies, which, in addition to the company of musical instruments, as was always the case in the sanctuary, there was so with music and song that was pleasing and beautiful, it would help arouse people to the proper emotional state of mind. Even the priests who were fit for the divine service and who sojourned and who were allowed in the Mikdash were forbidden to sit down in it. Weren't allowed to sit, to enter into the temple at every moment. They couldn't just walk in whenever they wanted, right? And never were allowed in the Holy of Holies except the high priest, who entered on Yom Kippur 4 times that day, and that was it. All this was to exalt the sanctuary, purpose to make the sanctuary a holy place. All right, so he's banging out a lot of things. I'm going to see if I can finish this whole chapter in the next 12 or 13 minutes, so we have at least a little time to talk. Inasmuch as many beasts were slaughtered daily in that holy place, I'm going to read quickly, but and the intestines were burned and washed. There's no doubt that had it been left in that state, its smell would have been like that of a slaughterhouse. It probably smelled awful, right? That right, and all this going on. Therefore, it was commanded in regard to it that incense be burned. So it makes sense. It's very practical that there should be incense, so it shouldn't smell so bad. And twice daily, in the morning and the afternoon, that's the primary time when the carbonot, the sacrifices, are being brought, in order to improve the smell and the smell of the clothes of all who served there. As it says, the odor of the incense was smelled even in Jericho. So think about the distance from Jerusalem to Jericho. If the incense was smelled that far away, it was an intense amount of incense in order that it shouldn't stink. This also preserved fear of the sanctuary, for had it not had a pleasant smell, if it stank that bad when you walked in, if the contrary were the case, then the result would have been the opposite of glorification. People would have thought of it as a yucky place, God forbid. For the soul is greatly solaced and attracted by pleasant smells and shrinks from stench and avoids it. Nobody likes to go into a place that smells bad. Everyone runs away. What about the anointing oil? It has 2 useful functions. It gives a pleasant smell And it also induces the belief that the anointed object is great and sanctified and distinguished beyond other things. You anoint something, you pour something like holy water. Oh, now it's holy, right? Same thing. You pour the special oil, now it's special. So people look at this thing that was anointed, and it has the special. It's something different. So therefore, the oil gives it a nice smell, and it makes it in people's eyes something special. All this redounds to the fear of the sanctuary, which is the cause of the fear of the Lord. By fearing the Mikdash, by recognizing the sanctity of the building, one also can come to the fear of God. For when one came there, the soul was affected, so that hard hearts were softened and touched. We all know this. You go into a holy place and you engage in song and prayer and these kinds of things. It affects us. It helps us think. It helps us connect closer to Hashem. That's pretty understandable. For the deity with faraway counsels divides this gracious ruse. All of this was devised as a gracious ruse in the Rambam's word, right? In order, right, that they be softened and become submissive when they came to the temple, so that they accept God's guiding commands and fear him. The bottom line was to develop a sense of awe and humility among the people that came to pray and came to worship and came to sacrifice, so that they should be amenable to the worship of God and keeping his commandments and fearing him. As is explained to us in the text of the Torah, thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which he chose, your tithes, etc., so that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. That's the bottom line of the whole service. Thus, the intended purpose of all these actions, whatever they may be, has become clear to you. So it's not that different. If you go to a shul on Yom Kippur, and there's a really nice Aron Kodesh, a beautiful ark, and people are dressed nicely, and people are dressed in white and wearing their talits, and Chazan sings a beautiful song, and if you're lucky enough, there's a choir, and there's a tremendous sense of awe and reverence. It instills in us that feeling, and all of this stuff that we just described, all together builds that atmosphere that God is looking for and wants to create, so that we can change. The reason for the prohibition against imitating the anointing oil and the incense is most clear. Why are we not allowed to do those same things? There's a law against us making the anointing oil or the incense. This was forbidden in order that this odor be smelled only there, that the scent. And we know in our minds, we have certain smells that we associate with things, right? God wanted it that smell should only be associated with that place, not with just anywhere. So that it should produce a stronger affection in them. And also noted that it should not be thought that whoever was anointed with this oil or one similar to it was singled out thereby. Some kind of magical idea that whoever has the oil poured on his head, he's all of a sudden holy, right? So God said, don't make the oil, so nobody runs around anointing people with the oil thinking that you could just become holy that way. A thought that would have produced ruin and sedition. The fact that the ark had to be carried on the shoulder and not in the wagon is clearly due to the intention to exalt it, right? The ark has to be carried as opposed to transported on a wagon, in order to give it special honor. Its shape ought not to be damaged, not even by moving the staves from the rings, and you can't damage the shape. Now, it's interesting because in the other translations, both in the newest one, the Lieberman one, and also in the Friedlander translation, and also in the Ibn Tibbon's Hebrew translation, this actually sounds different. What they write is that the ark is the intention to exalt it, and also so that its shape should not be damaged. In other words, because when people carry it, you take more care of it, right? So as opposed to throwing it on a truck where it gets banged around, right? So if people carry it, they're less likely to ruin the Aron, right? They're less likely to damage it. So I don't know exactly which ones are correct. The different translations have it different. What we have here is also in the Kapach translation. So I have a couple translations on one side, a couple on the other. I don't know who's right because I can't read Arabic. But I see that in different places. But similarly, the shape of the ephod and the breastplate ought not to be damaged, not even by moving one from the other. Those are garments that the Kohen wears. It was also commanded that the making of the garments be wholly woven, not divided and cut, so that the shape of the woven object not be spoiled. I'm almost finished this chapter. It was likewise forbidden for one individual among the servants of the sanctuary to take over the function of the other. Each person has a separate special function, because it's important, for slackness and negligence in all things occur when various functions are entrusted to a group of people. When you give when a lot of people have the same job, and it's not clear who does what, and one guy's not an expert, it often happens you make mistakes. It's much better that each person has his own line. He knows exactly what he's supposed to do, how he's supposed to do it, when he's supposed to do it, and so on, so it gets done properly. And every individual has not his own particular work assigned to him, and it becomes a big mess. It is also clear that the gradation with regard to various places, in consequence of which different laws are prescribed with respect to, it gets holier and holier as you go in more and more towards the inner sanctuary. All this was intended to bring out additional glorification and instill a greater fear into the heart of all those who came to the temple. We have thus set forth the reasons for all details belonging to this class. All right, that's chapter 45. So the Rambam just went ahead and explained to us all of the reasons for all of these mitzvot regarding the Beit HaMikdash, and why we treat it the way we treat it, why we had everything except for the table for the lechem apanim, for the showbread, which he said, I don't know. And that was that. We got a couple minutes for questions and comments. So I'm opening the floor. No one has anything to say. Everybody's just blown away. All right. Well, if that's the case, I'm just going to comment.
Let me ask one thing about the showbreads. What is your thought about the showbreads?
What is my thought?
Yeah.
The Rambam didn't know. I'm supposed to know.
Well, he said, leave it up to your own interpretation.
Yeah. Well. I think it's in Yirmiyahu. Hold on. Let me look. Give me 1 second. They bring it here in the Lieberman thing.
The showbreads always bothered me, because it seems to stand out separately from everything else that seems to be in harmony with the temple and the sacrifices. And now you got some bread hanging out there, and it doesn't fit. I mean, that to me is why it just doesn't fit. And that may be what he's saying. He can't fit it in because it doesn't fit the pattern of what he's trying to describe. I mean, that's sort of my thought.
So part of it is, and this comes from the Yirmiyahu. If you look in Perek Zion of Yirmiyahu, so there was an old a paganistic practice where they would give food and bread to their gods, and then the gods would eat it. Right? I mean, obviously, you and I know who was really eating it, but they would come back the next day and it would be eaten. Right? So, and the people were, but the showbread goes from week to week and remains uneaten, right? Right? It's lechem apanim. It's there to be shown to people, right? Right? So people can see. They'll come back the next week and they'll see our God is not eating any bread. He's not interested, right? He doesn't need bread, right? So we bring the bread to God as a form of sacrifice and an honor, but not because God needs anything to eat. And that's why it's a lechem apanim. It's a showbread. I'm just mostly this comes from the Sukkim and Yirmiyahu, but it's an analysis. You can see they write a nice note on page 483. If you have the Lieberman edition, they write this that I'm saying, but they just kind of comment. It's weird. It's strange that Rambam didn't, especially because it's so right up his line of thinking. You'd expect him to say it, but whatever. Maybe he thought it this, like he said about some of the other things. He thought it was kind of, he didn't think it was the real reason. I don't know. I really don't know why, but he certainly knew Yirmiyahu. So
yeah, I mean, it's sort of out of place. Even when we do the Silent Amida, it's there, and it just seems to me out of place. I mean, they talk about the showbreads. You're doing all this other stuff, and suddenly you got this thing about showbreads, and it just seems to break the continuity of the prayer to me. I just don't enjoy that part of the prayer. I mean, it's just never sat right with me, is what I'm saying. And then when this came out, it brought it even more. It just doesn't sit right with me. So I guess I have to reflect on it a little bit more and try to study it a little bit more. But it's just not. It doesn't fit to me. I feel uncomfortable with it in terms of
I
the
that's no, I
continuity of
understand.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the Rambam didn't help you much by saying he doesn't
No,
know
he
the
didn't. He
reason.
didn't.
Right.
Well,
But yeah, yes.
just a quick question. Um, uh, in terms of the smell, that you could smell it as far as Jericho, I can understand why that would be the case. But the incense, which is done, what, twice a day, I can't believe that the volume of the incense would have been sufficient to drown out the smell of these hundreds, thousands, I don't know, animals.
No, no, the smell of the incense was what they smelled in
With
Jericho.
the smell of the incense.
Right.
Well,
But
okay.
it was very powerful. The Rambam actually brought that statement of Chazal that you can smell the incense in Jericho,
Okay.
probably in order to fend off your question. Like, how
Okay.
much incense could you burn if you're slaughtering hundreds, maybe even thousands of animals a day,
Okay.
right? The stench has got to be overwhelming. So, but he's saying that the incense was even more overwhelming, so much so that the incense was smelled in Jericho.
Is there a prohibition against recreating the incense and the combinations so that we can test out this hypothesis?
Yeah, there is a prohibition against doing it.
Oh, really?
But if
Oh,
you
no.
go to but the thing is exactly how you can do it all minus one, right? Or
I see.
maybe not do the exact same measurements, right? So there's ways to get around to get close, but not exact, and then not violate the prohibition.
Okay.
So the guys in Israel, the Temple Institute people, that they try to recreate things. I'm pretty sure they have the incense ingredients there.
Okay.
But you'd need, in order to burn enough to create a smell like he's describing, you're talking about massive amounts of herbs that they're burning, right?
Yeah.
Not just a little incense stick that you put in your living room. You're
Well,
talking
The other thing about
we
that
know
is
the
very
size,
polluted.
right? We know the size of the incense bowl, don't we? I mean, that's prescribed.
well, yeah,
Can
but
it be large enough? I don't know.
they must have burned a lot. I mean, just in order to create that kind of powerful scent, uh, you know,
Yeah.
We'll have to wait.
How much pollution do you think it created?
uh,
It's not.
I
It's
don't
all
know.
natural.
You don't have to answer that, but
No, but it's not. It's natural herbs.
Natural
So
herbs, yeah.
so it's not pollution. It's not any like smoke that is bad for you. But I was just going to ask about specifically Jericho. Like, you think that Rambam believed that that was literal? Like, I mean, first of all, the distance, but second of all, we weren't supposed to be living in Yericho, and they gave Yericho to Rachav, and I don't remember who else they mentioned that Yericho was given to. Um, anyway,
Interesting. I hear what you're asking about whether Rambam thought it was literal, but I was hoping that Lieberman had a note, but he doesn't have a note on that. Uh, but it's clear from the context that he's saying it, right? Because he said, I'll read it again. Therefore, because of the terrible smell, he described how bad the smell must have been. Therefore, it was commanded in regard to it that incense be burned twice daily to improve the smell and the smell of the clothes of all who served. And then he says, their dictum, the odor of the incense was smelt even in Jericho, right? So no, it seems like he's saying that, and because anyone who's reading this is thinking, how much could the incense have really covered it up? And he says, no, that it was really powerful. So whether it was literal or maybe sometimes based on the wind of that day, maybe it was that possible. I don't. Bottom, it went far away.
yeah, Jerusalem's a windy city. It could blow. Yeah.
And maybe on certain days, if the winds are right, maybe you could smell the incense. Yeah, whether the Rambam thought it was little, I don't know, but he's certainly bringing it here in order to emphasize how strong the smell of the Ketores was. It's interesting because that's not usually what I think when I think about going to the Beis Hamikdash. I don't really think about the smell. You don't really pay. And what the Rambam is really telling us here is that that's one of the most overpowering things that you'll notice when you walk in, but not a bad smell. It'll be a wonderful smell, No, you'll go in and you'll smell the incense. So, yeah. Anything else? Well, if not, then next week we will continue with chapter 46. And it's going to be interesting. So we're getting close to the end of the reasons. We're up to 46 is going to be the 11th group. So we have 11, 12, 13. We have 4 more groups, right, of mitzvot. And then we have the conclusion of the Rambam. The last couple chapters are the conclusion. So we're really, really gearing up towards the end here. All right. Well, anyway, have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a wonderful
So,
Yontif.
thank you.
Actually, it's not
Thank
next week. It's the week after next. Because, wait, next week Shavuos is Monday to no. So next week we will have a class. Yeah, we do. Okay, fine. Yeah, all right. Have a wonderful Yontif.
Thank you, so.
You're welcome. Bye bye.
you so.